Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
This is Jane. She thinks she's just filling her car, but she's also filling the air with cancer-causing toxic chemicals used to boost octane in gas. What doesn't burn in the engine enters the air and your lungs, even your heart and brain. Bad for everyone, especially kids. Ethanol is a natural octane booster, clean burning and non-toxic. More ethanol means less scary stuff in our gas and in the air we breathe. And that makes your choice pretty plain, Jane. American Ethanol, cleaner air for Nebraska.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Todd Hultman describes the strength in corn and soybean markets. Rees discusses crop water needs for this point in the growing season. Loren Giesler gives an overview of soybean seedling diseases, and we'll show you the new commodity trading room at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's East Campus. DTN's Todd Hultman is our corn and soybean market analyst this week. The USDA's weekly crop progress report shows 75% of this year's corn in good to excellent condition, the same percentage as last week. With 92% of U.S. soybeans planted, the agency rates 74% of that crop in the best two categories, an increase of 2 points from a week ago. Before the planting season, the possibility of corn prices above $4 a bushel and double-digit soybeans may have seemed remote. But alas, here we are with soybeans recently making a 2-year high and, as Reuters noted, the longest bull run in more than 40 years. We talked with Todd Wednesday afternoon at DTN in Omaha and started by asking how we got to these price levels.
Jeff, it's been a fantastic switch, and I think a lot of people just didn't see it coming. Really, it's come from the demand side of the market, and it started in the new crop soybean spreads, as best as I can tell. Back about mid-April, we started seeing those spreads turn to a bullish inverse. What that means is commercials started showing a very strong interest in buying new crop soybeans and meal. That drove things up. At the same time, we started to get a stretch of dry weather in Brazil for their second corn crop. That caught them off guard, quite frankly, and so there end up being shorter corn supplies than they expected this time of year. The new crop demand drive that I mentioned in soybeans just has continued relentlessly, I think, beyond anyone's expectations. So in the big picture, the story's been all about demand, and it's been quite impressive.
Can you explain more about what role the funds have played so far?
Yeah, when this all started, as you can imagine, the funds were bearish in both corn and soybeans, so they were short a lot of contracts. And then when that demand changed, they had to go with it and to go with the trends. And so not only did they reverse long, though, we've actually seen some fairly bullish enthusiasm now in both corn and soybean markets. So the funds have played a big part in the rallies that we've seen the past 2 months.
The forecasted heat that we're seeing, at least in this part of the country, over the next few days to a week, what role do you think that has?
I think it's going to continue to be a very important part. And really, up till now, we have not seen a crop concern in this rally. It's been mainly demand-led. So here we are in mid-June. We're talking about temperatures in the hundreds here in Nebraska. We'll probably have at least 2 days of that before we get to even Sunday. And the rain that just went through this week in the northern Midwest, I think, was smaller in coverage than was earlier expected and lighter amounts. So a lot of the Corn Belt, the question is going to be, is there going to be enough moisture for the Corn Belt to endure the day after day in the 90s that we're expecting to see?
Eastern Corn Belt, is there a concern about moisture right now, or what kind of condition is that crop in?
Not so much in the east. They had a lot of precipitation earlier in the year, and really the entire Corn Belt started out with good, adequate moisture, and we're seeing that in a high crop rating. But my concern is about moving forward, so especially in the western Corn Belt, are we going to have the moisture there?
Let's talk about ethanol. What is the current status of ethanol?
Jeff, we just had a weekly report today of ethanol production, and we hit another new record high, well over 1 million barrels a day. That's a very strong pace. We continue to see, we saw bullish ethanol demand last year because gasoline prices are low, and when they're low, we all buy generous amounts of gasoline and ethanol included. That continues so far in 2016, and that's been a nice supportive factor for corn.
You wrote this week for DTN about India and the need to focus on India, or at least be aware of India in the future. Why is India important?
Absolutely. I don't know if people understand right now, India is the largest importer of soybean oil in the world and has been for about 3 years. Now, most people understand and say, you know, India's not a big meat-eating country. They're known for their vegetarian ways, and I understand that. But what we're looking at here is India is set up very much to follow in a similar path that we've seen China go on. China started their market reforms in the late 70s. India started about 1991. Now, India may come along a little slower than China did, but they've got the same structure of a land of a lot of people with significant poverty that is experiencing very rapid economic growth right now, and that's going to bring more numbers of people into the middle class. And when they get there, they like to eat a little better, and that really helps our grain demand.
As we look ahead to the big reports on June 30th, are there specific things you're watching for?
Yes, and both sides. I think the acreage numbers are going to get a lot of attention, of course, and specifically the soybeans. And the big question there, how big of a soybean planting are we going to have this year? Was there a big switch from corn into soybeans? I can almost see both arguments, but I think a reasonable estimate for soybeans is somewhere in the 84 to 85 million acre range. If we put all the numbers together, that puts us just shy or very close to a 4 billion bushel crop, weather permitting. So that could be a bit of a bearish concern on the soybean numbers. On the grain stocks, however, that's going to tell us more about how this demand has actually been going. Now, a lot of the demand concern we've seen so far has really been pointed to the new crop months. So it may or may not show up as strong yet in the old crop grain stocks numbers, but we'll see, and there is definitely room for a surprise there.
Just ask a general selling question. You know, these are prices that we didn't expect to have, as we talked about in the beginning. Do you have a general thought about what farmers should be looking for or what to take into account when they think about trying to make sales?
Yes. Well, of course, my line every year is find at least an inexpensive put at the start of the year to protect yourself from the disaster scenario. And that gives you room to go through these ups and downs and give yourself time to see how it works out. And then the advice is going to depend on, does a guy have irrigation or not? How confident are you in the production that you can get this year, especially where we have hot temperatures in play? I think there's no question we're going to have a hotter summer than we've had the past 2 seasons. So there is going to be concern of possible crop loss there. So you want to be careful not to forward contract too much.
Next week, North Dakota State Extension economist Frayne Olson will join us to preview the USDA's June 30th reports on acreage and stocks. Nebraska's statewide temperatures were near average for the month of May, but June could be a different story. As you'll see in Al's weekly forecast later in the show, more hot weather is expected during the next week. And while March through May was the 5th wettest for that stretch on record in the state, precipitation has been spotty in the eastern third of the state over the last few weeks. On Tuesday, we talked with Nebraska Extension educator Jenny Rees to learn about the crop water needs at this early point in the growing season and about how soil moisture sensors can help growers determine when to irrigate.
Well, Jeff, it's helpful because we have a lot of different soil moisture types or soil types throughout the state, a lot of different tillage practices throughout the state. And so without having soil moisture sensors in our fields, it's hard for farmers to know just how much their crops are using right now.
What are you noticing for how much moisture is in the profile right now?
So for the area that I serve, which is York, Seward, Clay Knuckles right now, what I've been seeing is the top 6 inches are depleting because of the corn and the soybeans using it right now. Below that, we still have a full soil moisture profile in that area of the state that I serve. But again, it can vary throughout the state depending on that soil texture type and the tillage type. So it's important for the farmers to be monitoring this.
And an important question as well, how much water is the crop using right now?
Okay, so we have some resources available for our farmers and our crop consultants, and they can be found on our cropwatch.unl.edu site. So we have High Plains Regional Climate Center data. We also have ET gauge data in which the farmers are reporting locally what their evapotranspiration or crop water use is for their part of the state. For the area that I serve, it ranged anywhere from 1.3 to 2 inches for reference ET last week. And so what that means is that's a reference. So the actual crop water use is based on what that crop growth stage is. So if we take an example, one of the ET readings in Seward, the reference ET was 2 inches. And for corn that's at V8 right now, you'd multiply that 2 inches times 0.5, which is that crop coefficient for V8 corn. So it would say that the crop used around 1 inch for last week.
So as farmers start to think about getting itchy with their irrigation systems, what's the recommendation?
So our recommendation overall would be to allow those crops to continue to root down. And the thing is, there is moisture down lower in the profile. We had all that rain prior to this past week, and so we may have had some nitrogen move down as well. We'd like those crop roots to go down and get that moisture in, as well as the nutrients too. Another reason why farmers may be irrigating now is they may be adding nitrogen to their crops via fertigation. So that may be a reason why you are seeing some pivots running.
The shallow root structure that might have been there because of all the rain we had earlier, therefore isn't as much of a concern as you might think?
The shallow root system is due to the fact that we had so much rain, and so the roots didn't need to move at that time. Research has shown that roots will continue to grow as long as they can continue to sense water and seek water.
During the year, how might the Nebraska Ag Water Management Network better help growers manage their crops?
So one thing that we would recommend is go ahead and check out the website at nawmn.unl.edu. And you can go to that site, you can read about the ET gauges, you can see the ET gauge readings throughout the state. Any of our farmer cooperators can also share their information with us and with others. Aaron Nygren is now managing that site, the ET gauge website, for Gary Zobek, who had retired. So Aaron's contact information is also on that site.
On the Market Journal website, we'll link to more information about crop water needs and the Nebraska Ag Water Management Network. Corn and soybean growers will have the chance to learn more about several control strategies by attending the Weed Management Field Day near Clay Center on Wednesday, June 29th. Event organizer and Nebraska Extension Weed Management Specialist Amit Jhala explains what producers will be able to see at this year's event.
We have a number of new projects that will demonstrate new technology coming to the market. For example, Roundup Ready to Extend soybean that are tolerant to dicamba. Plus, we have a project about analyst corn and soybean tolerant to 2,4-D and glyphosate. Plus, we also have balance bean, which will be tolerant to isoxaflutol. And we have a project about bolt soybean that will be tolerant to ALS group of herbicides. Plus, we have some other projects to discuss new herbicides that are already registered recently, including Acuron, Diflex Duo, Armazon Pro, and Anthem Max.
The Weed Management Field Day is free to attend and sponsored in part by the Nebraska Corn Board. Demonstrations begin at 8:30 and the event wraps up with a free lunch. USDA's latest crop progress report rates 79% of Nebraska's soybeans as good to excellent, 5 points better than the national average. To learn what problems could potentially exist in fields across the state, we talked with Nebraska Extension plant pathologist Loren Giesler earlier this week about soybean seedling diseases.
Well, we're starting to pick up the normal ones we see every year. So, the Pythium is probably the one that's been most common thus far. We're seeing some Fusarium, some Rhizoctonia, and still occasionally that Phytophthora. So just kind of depending on the soil temperature in the last few weeks, that's what we're picking up.
We're speaking on Monday. In what ways is this year different from a normal year of the growing season?
I'm about convinced there's not a normal year in the state of Nebraska, but I think the biggest is, just like the last few years we've had wet early. This year our soil temperatures were warmer though, but we still had those excessive rain events which really favor our water molds, so our Pythiums and our Phytophthora when we get those heavy events. The other thing is now, particularly here the next week forecast, we're in the over 90s, 100 degrees. these patches that have seedling diseases and have root rot and injury, don't be surprised if we don't see some of those start burning up and thinning out a lot more than they are right now.
Is there a reason why they'll burn up so quickly?
Well, they just don't have a root system, right? So early on, if they had these wet conditions, they get those root infections, and then you get all this heat and water demand, they can't keep up. So, in some cases, I think some of those plants are gonna literally just dry out, due to poor rooting. What
does the farmer need to look for when he or she goes out to the field?
I think the biggest thing is in any of these cases is to make sure you're identifying the problem correctly. So, if you can't do that yourself, make sure you're using a diagnostic clinic at the university. You can send those in, and Kevin Course runs that. He can tell you exactly if it's Pythium, if it's Rhizoc, if it's Fusarium, if it's Phytophthora, and then matching those seed treatments up in the future. The other thing, because of these heavy rain events, we are seeing quite a bit of PPO injury again, which we've seen the last few years, and that's our pre-emergent herbicides that are put on, and then with those excessive rains, we get that injury, and that can look a lot like seedling disease. So again, just make sure that you're identifying it correctly so you can manage it right in the future.
How effective have you found seed treatments to be over the years?
Over the years, and you see different reports. I just heard, another state, an agronomist, saying you should use them all the time. I haven't seen that that's the case, in all of our work. Now, if you're planting early, and particularly, in cooler soils, that's where those seed treatments are going to really pay. We've got a lot of grounds in Nebraska that, still if they're in there when soil temperatures are warmer, closer to 60 degrees, and they're planting beans, they're going to come right out of the ground and be fine. So I don't see it in all cases that you need it, but there's a lot of acres out there that do benefit significantly from seed treatments. And then again, making sure that you got the right one. And then if you have Phytophthora, we're going to make sure we use a resistance package in there. So, just kind of matching that up.
Is that the answer to the farmer who might have this problem year after year, or at least rotation after rotation, finding this problem consistently?
If you have this problem, even I would say in the last 5 years, if you've had a significant stand problem, I would always use a seed treatment. Okay, and then again, if you're identifying it correctly, then just always use that treatment. That's the best thing you can do. Now, if you get a year, like this year, you may have used a seed treatment and you have excessive rains, you still may have a problem and have to replant.
The Crop Watch website has more resources on soybean seedling diseases. We'll link to that information on the Market Journal homepage. The University of Nebraska-Lincoln has made significant additions to its East Campus over the last few years. Home to the university's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources, the campus has a recently renovated rec center and will soon feature a new residence hall and veterinary diagnostic center. And in May, UNL's Agricultural Economics Department held an open house for its new commodity trading room in Philly Hall. For UNL's Ag Econ students, this unique facility provides an opportunity to gain real-world experience by following the daily moves of a market in session.
In real time, the ticker atop UNL's new commodity trading room tracks the ups and downs of futures prices for corn, soybeans, wheat, cattle, and hogs. With the help of about $700,000 from donors, UNL's Ag Economics Department will use this room to help teach its students about the workings of commodity markets. Department head Larry Van Tassel says several business colleges have investment rooms connected to the stock market, but facilities of this type in an educational setting are fairly rare.
It's not utilized a lot in Ag Econ departments, but we thought, what a great opportunity to connect to the mercantile exchange and to be able to have a room to where students can really learn how to look at markets, how to analyze markets, and how to make decisions based upon markets.
Finished this spring, the commodity trading room can accommodate 46 students on 46 separate stations. Undergrads began using the room last semester under instructors Jeff Peterson and Fabio Matos.
The purpose was to have some sort of lab for our students to learn more about commodity markets. So just like plant science, animal science, they have their own labs where students can go and have hands-on experience with their subjects. So we wanted to do something like this in economics, in ag economics as well.
With dual monitors at each station, instructors can pull up PowerPoint slides, a current project, or market quotes. Van Tassel says the ability to show students prices in real time has led to a shift in class schedules.
Well, one of the things that was interesting is before this trading room, a lot of these classes were held in the afternoon. Now all of our instructors that utilize this have moved the courses to the morning and make sure that they are teaching when the markets are open.
From a marketing perspective,
any commodity market can experience volatile price swings during a session, but markets may be especially vulnerable when the U.S. Department of Agriculture releases key reports, such as its monthly supply and demand estimates for corn, soybeans, and wheat. If a class is in session at the time of that release, always at 11 a.m. Central Time, students are able to see traders' reactions.
So we can see at 11 o'clock when the report comes out, and we can see immediately what happens to price at that very moment. Then we can talk about the new information, the new numbers coming out in that report, how that might have affected expectations from buyers and sellers, and then understand why the market reacted that way.
With screens on each end of the room, instructors will also be able to bring in other marketers through video conferencing to discuss why a market is responding a certain way on a given day. Peterson's classes involve tracking the bottom line of a producer, which can be better illustrated by using the tools of this room.
what it allows us to do is incorporate a lot of the real-time items that are going on and really help the students understand how quickly the market moves, but most importantly to be able, because of some of the software we're able to use now, to be able to show them what difference that's making on their bottom line.
The room features 3 software platforms from BarChart, GrainBridge, and TelVent DTN. These products help show futures data, costs of production, and basis maps across the country.
Basically, this software is the same software that they would utilize as they go out to the workplace as a grain merchandiser, commodity trader. So it really does prepare them for the workforce.
In addition to working with students at UNL, Peterson also works with farmers on their marketing plans as the president of Heartland Farm Partners. He says the experiences students can get from this trading room will better prepare them for jobs after graduation.
The biggest thing that I continue to hear from the students is they go, this is so applicable to my situation. Because when we go through and we do our final project, they can use their home farm or ranch, or they can use a case farm. And what it helps them do is to really cement the concepts and the theory that we teach. They're able to walk away from the class and really see how it applies to everyday situations they'd make if they're in the role of making any marketing decisions.
The Commodity Futures Room will be home for 3 classes during the fall semester. Van Tassel says in addition to its teaching components at UNL, he hopes in the future it can be used to house a new commodity market club and as an educational tool for other producers. The June Nebraska farmer says cover crops are in a similar place that no-till was 20 years ago. This month's magazine profiles Greg Whitmore, who farms near Shelby and has been involved with the Soil Health Partnership. In March, the group announced the addition of 25 farms to its network of growers, making a total of 65. In the time that Whitmore has been cover cropping, he's realized several benefits, and he hopes they can be quantified through the Soil Health Partnership's research. You can read more about Whitmore's soil health practices in the June Nebraska Farmer. Now, with this week's weather forecast, here's Nebraska Extension ag climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here again for the weekly forecast. Of course, this last week we've seen the hot conditions develop, and we've seen temperatures soar well up into the upper 90s and low 100s across a substantial portion of south central, southeast Nebraska. A little bit cooler conditions in some of the more northern locations, but everybody was fairly steamy this week. And we've seen this heat persist now for the better part of the last 2 weeks. There are signs as we go forward in time that, of course, we will start to see this break down a little bit as we go into early next week. But we are also seeing some dry conditions being reflected on the latest drought monitor, and we want to bring that to your attention. So as we go to the drought monitor, and this is through Tuesday, essentially what we've seen is an increase of normally dry conditions across portions of Missouri, southeast Iowa, west central Illinois, and then of course we got another pocket over in Indiana and of course into the northeast with this area down in south of the Mason-Dixon line that has been persistent in dryness and is starting to expand. So basically anything that's coming from the Gulf Coast moisture-wise is going to have to wet up this lower layer atmosphere, and so we're going to have some type of system that can pull that moisture well up and interact with the fronts that are moving across the northern plains. Highly unlikely. And one of the things we look for the expansion of drought is areas to the south from the Gulf of the regions where we want to get precipitation to see how dry it is, because if we lose moisture from the atmosphere to wet this region up, there's less of it available for precipitation. Now I will say this, that in these areas the 30-day trends have been less than 50% of normal precipitation, and the 2-month trends have been less than 75% of normal precipitation. So with that, we've seen some expansion in southern Nebraska, or going down south into Nebraska in the Panhandle, and we would expect this area to actually expand as we go forward in time. And there's a couple areas of east central, southeast in south central Nebraska that are on the radar for an upgrade next week for normally dry conditions. And in some of these areas, if we miss out on some of the precip events through Tuesday, I would not be shocked whatsoever to see some go from abnormally dry to moderate drought conditions. So in terms of the forecast, what we see right now is we have this big expansive ridge that is stretching from the southwest up into the central plains. So in the middle layers of the atmosphere, we got this warm desert air moving into our region and the moisture flowing around this. So the system that's coming across will start to impact our weather as we get later into the weekend. But for right now, some of this moisture spilling off around the periphery of this high may touch off some thunderstorm activity as we go through today and into tonight across the panhandle, even though it's not going to be that significant. At least it is some moisture. And more importantly, as we go into tomorrow, we start to see the ridge trying to flatten out somewhat as this trough tries to move across the northern periphery of this. So we could see some thunderstorm develop once again, isolated in the very northwestern panhandle up in the Dakotas. But as we get into Monday, now we see the system rapidly moving toward the Great Lakes, and that's going to push the ridge to the southwest. So some of that moisture will ride over top of the ridge, and we could see some scattered thunderstorm activity. Indeed, the models are indicating that the heaviest precipitation will be across the northern plains, and we'll have a trailing cold front that will bring some thunderstorm activity to eastern Nebraska, although the precipitation output at this point in time doesn't point to a rosy scenario, maybe a half an inch to 3/4 of an inch general base coverage, but even that I might be a little bit iffy. It just depends on how quickly the system comes through and the timing of the event. Now as we go into Tuesday, we see that this trough deepens even more, so that pushes this ridge to the southwest and we get into this cooling pattern. So we're going to break our 90s. We're going to be back into the mid 80s to low 80s, particularly across northern Nebraska. It's going to feel fairly cool. And as we get into Wednesday, we'll see this trough dig even deeper. So we're going to have a big deep fesh of northerly winds at the upper atmosphere, keeping conditions cool. And as we get into Thursday, now we start to see the ridge standing, so a lot of this moisture is going to wrap around, come piling back down to the south, and our precipitation chances increase rather dramatically. And as we get into Friday, now the ridge starts to build back in and the heat starts to return in earnest as we get to the last full week of the month. So we look at the 8 to 14 day forecast for next Thursday to the following Tuesday. Above normal temperatures invading the western Corn Belt, and in terms of precipitation, the dryness starts to push eastward to encompass a large, substantial portion of the Corn Belt.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews are available individually on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. They include information on corn and soybean markets, crop water needs, soybean seedling diseases, and UNL's new commodity trading room. As always, you can keep up with Market Journal during the week by following us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Next week, Frayne Olson will be our grain market analyst. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.